The history of the science of sex therapy really has three major phases. The first is grounded in the work of Masters and Johnson, whose fundamental four-phase model of sexual response was what sex therapy was based on. Which aspect of those four phases was someone struggling with? Were they struggling with the orgasm phase? Were they struggling with the arousal phase? It was usually those two. Plateau. Were they struggling with the resolution phase? And interventions, sensate focus therapy specifically, were designed to address the phases of the arousal process. But when you listen to those phases, you've got arousal, plateau, orgasm, refractory period. You know what's missing in that? Desire.
How your brain experiences sex.
Because of the way Masters and Johnson were doing their research. People were just coming in knowing that they were going to get paid to masturbate to orgasm for science. They didn't have to want it. They didn't have to experience desire the way in a relationship you'd really hope that everybody involved in that sexual experience would want it, not just because they were doing it for science, though I'm in favor of people doing sex for science. When Helen Singer Kaplan came along in the 1970s, she looked at the clinical notes of all the therapists in her practice and found that the cases where they were not being successful were the cases where there was a desire problem, and noticed that desire was nowhere in the model they were using to treat sexuality. So she created the desire, arousal, orgasm model, the triphasic model. And it was a revolutionary to add desire. So now we can develop interventions targeting specifically when and how much people want sex. And then, just as it was starting to feel really complicated in the late 90s, Rosemary Besson, for example, in Canada, was developing the model of responsive desire, and we were needing a more neurobiological understanding of how this process worked. And Eric Janssen and John Bancroft at the Kinsey Institute had the wacky idea that sex works in the brain just like all the other things in our brain, which is that it is a pairing of excitatory impulses and inhibitory impulses. And so they started doing some survey research, and it turns out, yes, there is a sexual excitation system and a sexual inhibition system. So the sexual excitation system is, colloquially, it's the accelerator or the gas pedal, and it notices all of the sex-related information in the environment. That's everything that you see, everything that you hear, smell, touch, taste, and crucially, all the sensations in your body and everything that you think, believe, or imagine that your brain codes as related to sex. And it sends the turn-on signal that many of us are familiar with. Functions unconsciously at a low level all the time. Here we are talking about sex, so there's just a little bit of sex-related stimuli. So there's just a little bit of turn-on signal being sent. But fortunately, at the same time, your brakes, the inhibitory impulses, are noticing all the good reasons not to be turned on right now. Everything that you see, hear, smell, touch, taste, and everything in your body sensations and everything you think, believe, or imagine that your brain codes as a potential threat. And it sends an off signal. So the process of becoming aroused is a dual process of turning on the ons and turning off the offs. And it turns out, even though a lot of the sex advice that happens in the mainstream, when people are struggling with any aspect of sexual response, pleasure, desire, arousal, orgasm, if people are struggling, mainstream advice is usually about adding stimulation to the gas pedal, porn and role play and vibrators and handcuffs, and if you like those things, great, go for it. But it turns out when people are struggling, it's not usually because there's inadequate stimulation to the accelerator. It's because there is too much stimulation to the brakes. So developing interventions that focus on getting rid of all the things that are activating the brakes, which is, a lot of them have nothing to do with the sex itself, but have to do with stress, body image, trauma, and relationship issues. Well, sex is far more a brain process than a genital process. We can experience sex anywhere in our bodies. If someone has a spinal cord injury, so that they don't have any sensation in their genitals, they can still have orgasms by training their body to respond to other kinds of stimulation, because orgasm is a brain response. Arousal is a brain response. The biggest sex organ in your body is your skin, but the most important sex organ in your body is your brain. The simple beginner advice for how to begin incorporating the dual control model into your own sexual well-being is to make these lists of things that activate the accelerators and things that hit the brakes. But the reality of how our brains work is that it's much more complicated, because there can be certain kinds of stimulation that in one context feel amazing and in other contexts make you want to punch somebody in the face. My usual example is tickling. If you are already in a fun, flirty, playful, aroused, trusting, loving frame of mind and you're certain someone tickles you, it's not everyone's favorite, but you can imagine a world where that feels playful and good and can even lead to other things. But if you're in the middle of a fight with that exact same certain special someone and they tickle you, it is going to be very irritating. What? It's the same sensation, it's the same certain special someone, but the emotional context, by which I mean the actual activation in your brain, is different. That's the internal context, is different. And so your brain interprets the sensation as exactly the opposite. It perceives it as being not pleasurable because the context is wrong, or pleasurable because the context is right. Spanking goes the same way. There are a lot of circumstances where you absolutely would not want your partner to spank you. But if you're already aroused and have full consent and feel very trusting, and your partner slaps you on the butt, that could feel really good, even though in a different context, it could feel painful and irritating. So that's the power of context. I mean, if you want to look it up on Google Scholar, which I highly recommend, what we're looking at is the affective keyboard of the nucleus accumbens shell. So the affective keyboard means that we shift along the surface of the nucleus accumbens shell so that when you are in a relaxed, playful, positive, pro-social state of mind, 90% of the nucleus accumbens shell becomes devoted to approach motivation. Responding to almost any stimulation is something to move toward with curiosity. Ooh, what's that? And when you are in a stressed, non-social, avoidance state of mind, what the hell is that? 90% of the nucleus accumbens shell becomes devoted to avoidance threat motivation. It will respond to almost anything as something to avoid as a potential threat, even a stimulus that in a different context, it might have responded to as something to approach with curiosity. The dual control model sort of makes it sound like touch me here, don't touch me that way. It could be as simple as that, but that's not how pleasure works. The perception of a sensation in our bodies, as pleasurable or not, depends on the context in which we experience it. And the context means the external circumstances and our internal state. External circumstances, the bedroom door is locked, we know we're not going to be interrupted. We're wearing the sexy underwear that makes us feel sexy. Our partner made the bed with fresh sheets and we feel very cared for, and they know how much the grit on the sheets irritated us, and they just took care of that for us. That's the external circumstances. The internal state is whether you are stressed, depressed, anxious, lonely, experiencing repressed rage, we've all got it, or if you're feeling pro-social, playful, curious, exploratory. Do you feel ashamed of your own sexuality? That's an internal state that is going to keep the brakes on and is going to make it really difficult for your brain to access pleasure. Or do you feel really curious about your sexuality? That's an internal state that will allow the brakes to release so the accelerator can do what it does.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.